Viewer discretion is strongly advised. What you're about to hear includes descriptions of sexual abuse, violence, and disturbing content, taken directly from Courtroom Testimony as reported by Inner City Press. In what is rapidly becoming one of the most explosive trials in the history of the music industry, Sean Diddy Combs stands accused of orchestrating a system of control, exploitation, and abuse allegations that reach far beyond tabloid drama and into deeply troubling territory. At the center of it all is singer and model Cassie Ventura, whose testimony paints a haunting picture of systematic manipulation. Her account, delivered while visibly pregnant, details years of alleged ritualized abuse, coercion, and violence at the hands of one of the most powerful figures in entertainment. This isn't just about one relationship. It's about power, how it's used, how it's abused, and how it's shielded from consequence. As we walk through this testimony, we ask difficult questions about silence, complicity, and accountability in an industry that too often protects its stars over its victims. This is not easy to hear, but it's necessary. Because real lives, not headlines, are at stake. Cassie Ventura, 8 months pregnant and wrapped in a simple gray maternity dress, entered the courtroom to deliver some of the most powerful and emotionally charged testimony the trial had seen. The room fell silent as she began to speak, her voice steady, her posture poised. She took the court back to the beginning, how she met Sean Diddy Combs, and how what began as a seemingly glamorous and romantic relationship soon spiraled into something far more disturbing. What started with charm and attention evolved into what Ventura described as a life of control, a world carefully crafted and tightly monitored by Combs. It wasn't just emotional manipulation, she said. It was systematic. She spoke of an eerie consistency that defined their private encounters. The lights were always dimmed to a specific tone. Music was chosen ahead of time. Scented oils were prearranged. Even the placement of towels was deliberate. Every detail, she testified, was part of a larger design, one that wasn't about intimacy, but about dominance. Over time, her personal autonomy began to dissolve. Decisions weren't hers to make. Boundaries didn't apply. She described being drawn, step by step, into a life where her sense of self, her freedom, was slowly stripped away. This was not chaos. It was order. An orchestrated environment where every move was directed by Combs, and compliance was expected. The courtroom listened in stillness, not just to the facts, but to the weight of what it meant to lose agency in such a methodical way. Ventura's testimony wasn't just about the past. It was a statement about how abuse can hide behind luxury, behind fame, and behind silence. In the sterile formality of the federal courtroom, Cassie Ventura's testimony pierced through legal proceedings with raw emotional intensity. Sitting 8 months pregnant in a high-collared gray maternity dress, her composed exterior belied the devastating nature of her allegations against music mogul Sean Diddy Combs. It wasn't random, Ventura testified, her voice steady despite the content of her words. It was methodical, choreographed, produced like everything else in his life. According to Ventura, what happened behind closed doors followed a precise 4-step ritual that transformed private moments into directed performances. The first phase required her to narrate everything happening in real time, describing sensations and emotions aloud while Combs allegedly sat in the corner, directing like a film producer. He would sit there and make me describe what I saw, what I felt, she testified. He wanted every detail. The second phase involved what prosecutors called an obsession with sheen. Evidence presented from federal raids included over 1,000 bottles of baby oil and lubricants, enough to fill an aisle at a pharmacy, according to the prosecution. Ventura described how sessions would pause every few minutes for reapplication. He wanted us to look like we were wrapped in cellophane, she said. Every inch had to shine. He would scream if we looked dry. More disturbing was her explanation of the purpose. When you're covered in oil, you're not a person anymore. You're an object. She described being unable to get traction on sheets, sometimes falling, while Combs allegedly laughed or berated her for ruining the performance. The third phase involved what Ventura termed oral servitude, encounters she says she tried to rush through, not out of disrespect, but because I wanted it to end. Throughout her testimony, she maintained these weren't consensual acts of intimacy but demonstrations of power and control. I wasn't there because I wanted to be, she stated. "I was there because I thought if I didn't do it, he'd find someone else." The final phase, intercourse, wasn't always direct. Sometimes Combs would observe, other times participate, depending on his comfort with the male escorts present. If he trusted the guy, he'd participate. If not, he just sat there, playing God. Throughout these encounters, Ventura testified that staff members would enter the room, not to intervene but to bring towels, reapply oils, or handle recording equipment. "Nobody said anything," she recalled. "They all acted like it was normal." Most chilling was her description of the aftermath. How Combs's alleged cycle of abuse extended beyond these sessions into emotional manipulation, with messages like "you know I love you" and "you make me do crazy things" following incidents of physical violence. "It was like he broke me down and then tried to build me back up," Ventura testified. "I didn't think of it as abuse at the time. I thought of it as love." The surveillance footage from the Intercontinental Hotel later presented by prosecutors appeared to substantiate allegations of physical violence, showing Combs grabbing Ventura by the head, throwing her to the ground, walking away, then returning to kick her as she lay motionless. As testimonies from former staff members and other witnesses accumulated, the prosecution built a case suggesting these weren't isolated incidents but part of a systematic pattern of behavior spanning years, a pattern that, according to the prosecution, reflects not just personal misconduct but potentially criminal enterprise. "He told me if I left, no one would believe me," Ventura testified. "And I believed him." The case continues, with potential implications reaching far beyond this individual relationship into broader questions about power, accountability, and the systems that may have enabled such alleged behavior to persist unchecked for decades. Cassie Ventura's testimony painted a chilling picture of a relationship that, at its core, was not about love or intimacy, it was about dominance. As she spoke about the encounters with Sean Diddy Combs, it became clear that the actions she described weren't part of a consensual relationship, but part of a calculated power play, a manipulation that extended far beyond the confines of their private interactions. She explained how, during these sessions, there were no moments of mutual affection or intimacy. Instead, there was control, meticulous and unyielding control. Ventura described how staff would enter the rooms during these encounters, often carrying supplies or recording equipment, all without questioning what was happening. The staff members, according to Ventura, acted as if this was normal, part of the routine. No one seemed to question the disturbing nature of what was unfolding. She also described a pervasive sense of surveillance. Hidden cameras were, in her belief, used to capture everything, her every move, every moment, every detail. What was meant to be private was, in her mind, being watched, recorded, and perhaps even stored for future manipulation or use. The idea that she was being constantly monitored, that her actions could be captured and controlled, only deepened the sense of powerlessness she felt. But what made her situation even more frightening was what happened when she attempted to assert herself. Ventura recalled how, every time she tried to resist or leave, the response was violent. She was struck, shouted at, and belittled. Her voice, her objections, were met with physical aggression, a clear reminder that her autonomy, her desire for self-preservation, was irrelevant in the face of Combs's overwhelming power. The violence she described wasn't just about physical harm, it was about control. It was meant to remind her that she had no real escape, that resistance was futile. Federal authorities later raided Combs's properties, uncovering a shocking amount of over 1,000 bottles of lubricants, an unsettling confirmation of what Ventura had described. The sheer quantity of these items was more than just a peculiar detail, it was evidence of the scale and consistency of the abuse. It illustrated just how organized and calculated this manipulation had been, and how deeply ingrained it was in the patterns of their interactions. Ventura's testimony wasn't simply about individual encounters. It was about a systematic effort to strip away her autonomy, to control and degrade her in ways that went beyond what anyone might have imagined. The physical violence, the surveillance, the use of substances, all of these elements were tools in a larger scheme of domination, one that didn't allow for freedom, dignity, or consent. The discovery of over 1,000 bottles of lubricant was more than a shocking statistic, it was a physical symbol of the abuse. It spoke to the lengths Combs allegedly went to in order to maintain control over Ventura and others who may have been caught in his web. It revealed the scale of manipulation and the way power and privilege can be wielded to subjugate and exploit. This wasn't a fleeting moment of passion. It wasn't a brief lapse in judgment. According to Ventura, this was a carefully orchestrated environment, one designed to break her down emotionally, physically, and psychologically. And every time she tried to break free, the response was the same. Force, aggression, and an overwhelming sense of dominance. After Cassie Ventura's powerful and harrowing testimony, the trial took a significant turn when a male escort, identified in court as D.A., took the stand. His testimony added a new layer of complexity to the case, offering insights from a perspective that had been deeply involved in the encounters Ventura described, but also creating some contradictions. While D.A. did not fully align with Ventura's account regarding the initiation of certain bookings, he did confirm some of the most troubling aspects of her testimony. He acknowledged that Combs enforced strict rules during these encounters, rules that were, in many ways, dehumanizing and degrading. D.A. testified that these rules were not only rigid but also dictated every detail of the interactions, leaving little room for personal choice or comfort. The environment, he explained, was shaped by Combs's absolute control, where every participant was expected to comply with the set expectations. D.A.'s description of the behavior he witnessed was equally disturbing. He described witnessing instances of abusive conduct, moments that made him feel uncomfortable, but also conflicted. He admitted that, despite his reservations, he continued to participate in these activities because, at the time, they were framed as part of the lifestyle, as if this behavior was an expected norm in certain circles. In that environment, where power and privilege dictated actions, D.A. said he felt compelled to go along with it, despite the troubling nature of what he witnessed. The normalization of abuse, he suggested, made it harder for him to see the true extent of the harm being caused. This was a stark reminder of how abuse can be normalized, even by those who witness it firsthand. For D.A., the lines between what was acceptable and what was abusive blurred, leaving him to rationalize his participation as part of a lifestyle that was ultimately built on control and exploitation. His testimony, though conflicted in certain details, still confirmed the central elements of Ventura's account: the rules, the coercion, and the abusive behavior that characterized the environment Combs allegedly cultivated. Prosecutors supported Ventura's claims by introducing powerful evidence, photos of injuries that allegedly resulted from the abuse, and voice recordings that appeared to capture moments where Combs's behavior crossed into intimidation and coercion. These photos and recordings offered a stark visual and auditory confirmation of Ventura's allegations, lending further weight to her account and painting a grim picture of what she endured. The photographs, in particular, served as a haunting reminder of the physical toll of the abuse. They showed injuries that, while shocking, were part of a larger pattern of control and violence described by both Ventura and D.A. The voice recordings, meanwhile, provided an audible glimpse into the emotional and psychological manipulation that went hand in hand with the physical abuse. The combination of this evidence, alongside the testimonies of Ventura and D.A., created a compelling case for the prosecution. As D.A.'s testimony continued, it became clear that what might have been seen as a lifestyle was, in reality, a carefully constructed environment of manipulation, dominance, and abuse. The trial now stood at a critical juncture, with the accounts of those who had witnessed, participated in, and been affected by the events coming together to form a disturbing narrative. The trial took a dramatic turn as the prosecution introduced a raw, silent video surveillance footage from the Intercontinental Hotel dating back to 2016. The video, played for the courtroom, showed an unthinkable and chilling act. In the footage, Sean Diddy Combs is seen grabbing Cassie Ventura by the head, violently throwing her to the ground, then walking away. But the horror didn't end there. Combs returned to the motionless Ventura and kicked her, leaving her on the floor. The courtroom was stunned into silence as the footage played. There was no sound, no context except for the raw, undeniable brutality captured in the video. The silence in the room was overwhelming, as jurors, attorneys, and those present watched the stark visual evidence unfold before them. Prosecutors were quick to dissect every moment, methodically breaking down the video frame by frame. They emphasized the unprovoked nature of the assault, the violent, cold manner in which Ventura was treated. There were no signs of any provocation or resistance from Ventura. Instead, the footage showed a chilling image of a woman, defenseless and vulnerable, enduring a senseless act of violence. The prosecution sought to make clear that this wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of abusive behavior. To support this, Israel Flores, a former hotel security guard now with the Lapt, took the stand. He testified that he was the one who found Ventura distressed and crying in the hotel following the assault. He recalled Ventura saying, "I just want to go," a haunting statement that painted a picture of the emotional toll she had endured. Flores also testified that he had seen a bruise under Ventura's eye, but that detail was mysteriously absent from his 2016 report. The defense seized on this discrepancy, attempting to challenge the credibility of Flores's testimony and raising questions about the reliability of his recollection. However, the jury and those present in the courtroom couldn't ignore the power of the video footage itself. The raw, uncut evidence that painted a chilling picture of Combs's actions. In that moment, the gravity of the trial hit home for everyone involved. This was no longer a case of accusations or testimonies. The visual evidence spoke volumes, forcing the courtroom to confront the brutal reality of what had happened. As the trial unfolded, it became increasingly clear that the prosecution wasn't building a case based on isolated incidents. They were establishing a pattern of abuse, one that stretched far beyond the single incident of violence caught on camera. Key testimony from a digital forensics expert added a chilling layer of evidence to their argument. The expert revealed that Sean Diddy Combs had deleted numerous videos from his cloud storage just days after the assault at the Intercontinental Hotel. The timing was crucial. These videos were erased after the public confrontation, suggesting an attempt to cover up evidence. But it was the names of the files that raised alarm. Titles like Session Room 3 and Cassie Freakoff 2. These were not just random titles, they were ominously detailed, suggesting a disturbing pattern of planned, recorded encounters. The prosecution emphasized these file names as part of a deliberate effort to document and control these encounters in a way that mirrored the abusive environment Ventura described. Further corroborating this pattern, former assistants who had worked for Combs provided damning testimony. They spoke about how Combs had them procure bulk quantities of lubricants, a detail that aligned with Ventura's earlier testimony about the ritualistic encounters. The assistants recalled a pervasive culture of secrecy, an atmosphere where nothing was questioned, and where personal boundaries seemed to vanish in favor of maintaining a carefully constructed facade. One assistant, in particular, recalled a deeply troubling moment, finding Cassie Ventura sobbing alone and whispering, "Please don't tell him I'm crying." This heartbreaking statement painted a stark picture of Ventura's emotional state during her time with Combs, isolated, frightened, and unable to show vulnerability in the face of his power. The evidence presented by the prosecution painted a clear picture of a systematic effort to control, manipulate, and exploit Ventura. The deleted videos, the bulk lubricants, the culture of secrecy all pointed to a pattern of behavior that extended far beyond what one might expect in a personal relationship. It was a pattern of calculated manipulation, coercion, and abuse, one that was concealed through secrecy and intimidation. As the trial moved forward, it became increasingly clear that the prosecution was not just prosecuting a single act of violence, but was unveiling the disturbing reality of how abuse was woven into the very fabric of the relationship between Combs and Ventura. The trial took another startling turn when a previously unnamed witness, Trisha Weller, took the stand. Her testimony was jaw-dropping, providing a new layer of complexity to the allegations and offering a first-hand account that corroborated much of Cassie Ventura's earlier claims. Weller described attending what she initially thought was a creative dinner at Sean Diddy Combs's home in 2017. However, upon arriving, she found herself in a situation she hadn't anticipated. She was locked in a room with 3 strangers, one of whom was filming the entire encounter. Weller was clearly caught off guard by the bizarre and unsettling nature of what she found, and the fact that she was filmed added a layer of manipulation and control to the situation. The following day, Weller was paid $7,000 through a shell company, an unusual payment that raised further red flags about the nature of the event. As she left Combs's home, Weller had a disturbing encounter. She passed Cassie Ventura in the hallway. According to Weller, Ventura looked at her in a way that suggested she was used to seeing such things happen. The casual nature of Ventura's reaction confirmed to Weller that the abuse was not an isolated incident, it was something that had become normalized. Weller's testimony was a chilling confirmation of what Ventura had described: repeated and systematic abuse that was not only tolerated but expected. It underscored the disturbing pattern of behavior, where exploitation and manipulation were a part of the routine, a normalized part of life in Combs's world. Her account added a new, deeply troubling layer to the case, making it clear that the abuse Ventura described was not just confined to her experiences, but a part of a larger, systemic issue. As the testimony in the trial intensified, so did Sean Diddy Combs's reaction. Courtroom sketches captured a stark contrast from the confident figure once seen dominating the music industry. Now, he was slumped over, his hands covering his ears, visibly overwhelmed by the weight of the accusations against him. The self-assured demeanor that had once defined him was replaced by distress and vulnerability. Meanwhile, his legal team made an attempt to suppress key pieces of evidence, arguing that they were prejudicial and could unfairly sway the jury. However, the judge swiftly denied the motion, emphasizing that complete transparency was essential in light of the severity of the allegations. The courtroom's atmosphere grew tense as these crucial details, once concealed, were now being revealed. This trial is far more than just a legal battle, it represents a cultural reckoning. Cassie Ventura's testimony didn't merely expose her personal trauma, it shone a light on the darker undercurrents of the entertainment world: how power, wealth, and silence can be weaponized to control, exploit, and silence those caught in its grip. And with that revelation comes a series of uncomfortable but necessary questions. Who enabled this behavior? What systems, both in the music industry and beyond, failed to protect those like Ventura? And how can justice be achieved? Not only in the courtroom but in our wider culture, where abuse is often hidden beneath the surface of fame. Because behind every headline, behind every celebrity scandal, there are real human lives, lives that deserve to be heard, acknowledged, and protected.